The wet snow wasn't just falling, it was collapsing on the windshield. We were parked on a side street in Capitol Hill, the Jeep's engine a low hum against the heavy silence, the world outside blurred and quiet. It's not personal, Eliza. It's immediate family only. I turned very slowly to look at my husband. The words didn't make sense. They sounded like English, but they felt like a code I couldn't decipher. Immediate family. Marcus, we've been married for 9 years. I know, he said, and he did that thing that always comes before the bad news. He didn't pinch the bridge of his nose, that was the old Marcus. The new Marcus, the investment banking titan in training Marcus, simply rubbed his thumb and forefinger together like he was testing the grain of some fine fabric. Or maybe just brushing me off. You know how my dad is, he continued, staring at a streetlight that painted a sick orange glow on the falling snow. He's getting traditional in his old age. He wants his 60th birthday to be just him, my mom, and the kids. Blood relatives, his words. Blood relatives, I repeated. The heater was blowing air that smelled faintly of burnt dust and old coffee, and I suddenly felt freezing cold. The 60th birthday trip, the NICECO trip. The one I've been planning. Babe, don't, he sighed. The one I found the resort for, the one I spent 3 weeks coordinating flights for across 4 different cities. The one, and my voice went very quiet, the one I transferred $12,000 for from my business account to cover the deposit for everyone. He finally turned to look at me. His eyes, which I used to think were the color of warm whiskey, just looked flat, empty. I was going to pay you back for that, you know I was. My bonus is coming. His bonus. The mythical bonus, it was always coming. It was the carrot he dangled over our lives, the excuse for every 70-hour week, every missed dinner, every holiday I spent with his family while he just had to finish one more pitch deck. That's not the point, Marcus, I said, and I was proud of my voice. It wasn't shaking, not yet. The point is, you've been letting me plan this trip. You watched me on the laptop last night confirming the ski lift passes. You knew, when were you going to tell me? I'm telling you now, he snapped, and his frustration was so sudden it was like a slap. He immediately recoiled, running a hand through his perfect hair. Look, I'm sorry, the timing is it's all messy. Dad is being weird, the firm is killing me, and I couldn't find the right moment to drop this on you. He saw me as something to be dropped, a problem to be managed. I stared at the dashboard. 9 years. 9 years I'd poured everything I had into this man. I'd supported him when he'd quit his first job on a whim. I'd used my own savings, the inheritance from my grandmother, to keep us afloat for 6 months while he found himself. I'd woken up at 3 a.m. for 4 years to build my bakery from a folding table at a farmer's market into a business that actually, consistently, paid our mortgage. My little bread hobby, as his mother called it. That little bread hobby had just paid for his entire family, his blood relatives, to fly first class to Japan for a luxury ski trip. A trip I was now being informed I was not invited to. It's not personal, he said again, softer this time, trying to placate me. That was the moment. That was the moment the floor didn't just crack, it vanished. It wasn't the words. It was the realization. He didn't just forget, he didn't just miscommunicate. This was a decision. A choice had been made weeks or maybe months ago by people I called family. And my husband, the man I loved, had sat there and watched me pay for my own exclusion. Okay, I said. Marcus blinked, visibly relieved. The tension left his shoulders. Okay, really? I knew you'd understand. You're the most reasonable person I know, Lisa. No, I said, my hand already on the cold plastic of the door handle. Okay, I understand. I need to get some air. What, Eliza, it's snowing. Don't be dramatic. That word, dramatic. I opened the door and the freezing air was a shock, but it was the clearest thing I'd felt all night. The snow was already melting into my hair and I didn't care. I think, I said, looking at him through the open door, my voice finally shaking with a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. I'm just now realizing what dramatic actually looks like. And this isn't it. Not even close. I stepped out and shut the door, the thunk of it echoing on the empty street. I started walking, not knowing where I was going, my phone already in my hand, dialing Jenna. I didn't know it yet, but that walk was the first step. The first step of a journey I never asked to take, a journey that would start in humiliation and end somewhere else entirely. I didn't know about the lies. I didn't know about the affair. I didn't know about Sophie. All I knew was that my husband had just told me I wasn't family. And for the first time, I was starting to believe him. My hand was on the door handle, but I hadn't opened it yet. I was still frozen, processing the words blood relatives. Marcus was watching me, and I could see the banker in him taking over. He wasn't seeing his wife anymore. He was seeing a negotiation that was going sideways. Babe, don't, he sighed, that familiar sound of impatience he usually reserved for slow waiters or bad cell reception. Look, I know you're stressed. You've been working nonstop at the bakery. Honestly, I thought you'd be, I don't know, relieved. Relieved? My voice was a rasp. Relieved to be uninvited from a trip I've spent a month planning? Relieved to have a break? He said, his voice brightening with the false, forced optimism of a salesman. Think about it, a whole week to yourself, no in-laws, no 3M alarms to bake, you can just relax. He was leaning in now, smelling of expensive wool and the whiskey he'd had at the office. I'll tell you what. I'll book you a spa week, my treat. Go to that fancy place in Vail you're always looking at, full package. A spa week, his treat, with my money. The thought was so cold, so sharp, it was almost funny. I nearly laughed. The sound that came out of me was more like a choke. His treat? Like the $7,000 live edge redwood dining table that dominated our apartment. The one he'd had to have. It's an anchor piece, Lisa, he'd said. It shows we're serious. I was the one who signed the check for it, using the money from the massive catering order for the governor's fundraiser. His treat? Like the $2,800 for his custom-tailored suits last year. I'm in front of clients, babe, I have to look the part. Paid for by my 4th of July pastry boxes, 400 of them sold out in 2 days. His treat? Like his $1,200 entry fee for the private whiskey tasting club, a networking necessity. Paid for by the bread subscription service I'd built from nothing. This man, the man I had supported through his MBA, paying our rent with my catering side hustle. The man whose student loans I had been dutifully paying off, $850 a month for 3 straight years. Because his base salary was all just living expenses and his bonus was always just around the corner. This man who had my credit card, the one for my business, the one I used for flour and butter and yeast, in his wallet right now for gas and client lunches. This man was offering to buy me a spa week with my own money as a consolation prize for being publicly and privately humiliated. He was still talking, and honestly, with the venue in Niceco, the private chalet, the capacity is just tight. Dad is being weird about the guest list, you know how he gets. I'm not a guest, Marcus, I said. The words were quiet, but they cut through the hum of the heater. I'm your wife. I know, but I just found out I've funded my own exclusion from a family vacation and you're offering me a pedicure. His face, which had been set in patient negotiator, finally cracked. The annoyance was instant. Riley, come on, don't be dramatic. That word, dramatic, it landed like a slap. It was the word he used when I was being difficult, when I asked why his work dinner had lasted until 2 a.m., or when I questioned why our joint savings account was perpetually empty. I wasn't being dramatic, I was being deceived, and I was paying for the privilege. That's when I pulled the handle. The click of the latch was deafening. I swung the door open, and the freezing air wasn't just a shock, it was a baptism. It was the first clean, honest thing I had felt in months. The snow was coming down harder now, catching in my eyelashes, and I stepped out onto the sidewalk, my boots sinking into the wet slush. Eliza, what are you doing? It's freezing. Get back in the car? I looked at him. Really looked at him, the man sitting in the warm, expensive car, his face a mask of annoyance and disbelief. He wasn't my partner. He was a client I was done serving. I need to think, I said. My voice was calm, the shaking had stopped. The cold realization had settled in, and it was a strange, hard comfort. I turned and started walking. I heard him yell my name again, but I didn't stop. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My fingers were already numb, but I managed to hit Jenna's name. As the phone started to ring, my mind wasn't even on Marcus anymore. It was on the laptop. It was on the emails. It was on the moment 3 months ago when Marcus had first brought up the trip. That's when it had started. That ordinary Tuesday morning, me at that stupid redwood table, scrolling through invoices, him walking in with a coffee, a kiss on the head, and the most poisonous, casual lie I'd ever heard. My phone was pressed to my ear, the cold glass sticking to my cheek. Jenna picked up on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. Eliza, it's 1 in the morning. Is the bakery on fire? Jenna, I whispered, and my voice cracked. The snow was soaking through my coat, and I was shivering so hard my teeth ached. Can I come over? I'm in Cap Hill. I'm putting on pants, she said, instantly awake. Get in a cab now. The cab ride was a blur. I stared out the window at the smeared neon lights of Denver, my mind not in the back of the Prius, but 3 months earlier. It was September, a Tuesday morning just after 5 a.m. I was at our massive redwood dining table, laptop open, surrounded by a fortress of coffee mugs and flour-dusted invoices. My whole world smelled like sourdough starter and anxiety. Marcus walked into the kitchen, already in a crisp, pinstriped suit. He looked like he was stepping out of a magazine, and I looked like I'd been wrestling a bear. Dad finally decided on his 60th, he said, not looking up from his phone. Niceco, can you believe it? He wants to do the whole luxury ski thing. I'd looked up from my screen, my mind clicking through spreadsheets. Japan, wow, that's a lot. My heart had given a stupid little lurch. Hope. Their marriage had been struggling, strained by his 70-hour weeks and my 3 a.m. baking alarms. We were two ghosts haunting the same expensive apartment. Maybe this trip, I'd thought this incredible, ridiculous trip would be a reset. Maybe we'd sit in one of those outdoor hot springs, snow falling around us, and actually talk for the first time in months. Yeah, it's going to be insane, he'd said, finally looking at me. Listen, I was thinking you're so much better at this stuff than I am. He gestured vaguely at my laptop. You know the logistics. I'm just drowning at the firm right now, babe. Analyst reviews are coming up. The analyst reviews. Always the analyst reviews. The perpetually dangling carrot that kept him at the office until midnight, while I was the one keeping our actual, tangible life from falling apart. Of course, I'd said like I always did. Send me the details. He'd kissed my forehead, a dry mechanical kiss that was more about punctuation than affection, and left. And I'd gone back to my little bread hobby, the one that had paid for his MBA prep courses, his tailored suits, his networking dinners, and now apparently his entire family's luxury vacation. I'd spent hours on it. I found the chalet, the Akasawa estate, perched on the side of the mountain, floor-to-ceiling windows with views that magazines called life-altering. A private onsen, a ski-in/ski-out entrance, a chef. I'd pictured us there, glasses of sake in hand, finally breathing the same air. A few weeks later, in early October, he'd asked me to coordinate for his whole family. It's a favor to Dad, he'd said. He's just so overwhelmed with the planning. So I did. I'd booked flights for 6 people, his parents, his brother Liam and his new wife, and supposedly Marcus and me. The deposit came to $12,000. I remembered staring at the confirm payment button on the resort's website. It was a massive chunk out of my business account. That money was supposed to be for a new proofing oven. It was my money earned in the dark, hot hours before the city woke up. I'd felt a small, sharp sting of unease, a voice so quiet I could barely hear it telling me to wait, to ask him about it, but I'd pushed it down. This was my family. This was the man I loved. I trusted him. I pressed confirm. The next morning, I told him it was done. You're a lifesaver, Lisa, he'd said, his eyes glued to his phone. I don't know what I'd do without you. The words had felt cold, transactional, like I was a very efficient and very free executive assistant. But I told myself I was being oversensitive. Now the cab was pulling up to Jenna's apartment. I paid the driver, my hands shaking. I'd been so stupid, so blind. As I walked up the snowy steps to her door, another memory hit me, so sharp it made me stop. A conversation, a crack in the foundation I hadn't even registered at the time. It was just last week, at his parents' house for Sunday dinner. His brother Liam finding me in the kitchen while I refilled my wine glass. So excited for Niceco, he'd said, grabbing a beer. It's going to be epic, just the Core 7, intimate. The Core 7, my boots were frozen to the welcome mat. I stood there on Jenna's porch, the snow swirling around me, lost in that memory from last Sunday. It felt like I was watching it happen to someone else through a thick, distorted pane of glass. We were at his parents' house. A Sunday dinner. I dreaded those dinners. Their house in Cherry Creek was a monument to beige, a silent, carpeted palace that always smelled like expensive potpourri and old, unquestioned money. I always felt like I was on inspection, my clothes too artisan, my hands too rough from kneading dough, my little bread hobby a quaint, confusing novelty to them. His mother, Eleanor, was in rare form. It's just so wonderful you have this little thing that keeps you so busy, Eliza, she'd said over the too dry roast beef. Marcus needs a partner who understands the demands of a real career. She'd said it with a smile like she was complimenting me. Marcus had just nodded, his eyes on the Broncos game in the next room. I'd escaped to the kitchen for my third glass of wine, my knuckles white on the stem. I was leaning against the cold granite, counting the minutes until we could leave when his brother Liam bounced in. Liam was fine, the jovial, slightly clueless younger brother. He'd always been nice to me in a simple, surface-level way. "Refill?" he'd asked, grabbing a beer from the Sub-Zero fridge. Man, I'm so pumped for NiceGo. It's going to be epic, just the core 7, intimate. The wine glass had stopped halfway to my lips. The fluorescent light over the sink buzzed. 7, I'd forced a laugh. What do you mean, 7? He'd started counting on his fingers, his brow furrowed in concentration. Yeah, Mom, Dad, me and Sarah, Marcus and James, you remember our cousin from Singapore. He's flying in to meet us. He'd beamed. It's been like 5 years, 7 of us, it's gonna be wild. My blood didn't just run cold, it turned to slush. I'd booked 6 flights, 6 sets of lift passes. 6 deposits for the chalet, Marcus, me, his parents, Liam, his wife Sarah, 6. Liam's list hadn't included me. Oh, I'd said, and my voice sounded thin, reedy. Right, James, I must have miscounted. I'll have to double-check the confirmations. Yeah, Dad just locked James in last week. Crazy, right? He'd shrugged, oblivious, and then Sarah, his wife, had called him from the living room. Coming, he'd yelled and vanished, leaving me alone in the sterile, oversized kitchen. I'd stood there for a full minute, my heart hammering a sick, heavy beat against my ribs. I counted on my own fingers. Mom, Dad, Liam, Sarah, Marcus. James, that was 6, so who was the 7th? Wait, no, Mom, Dad, Liam, Sarah, Marcus, James, that was 6, and Liam said 7, my mind was spinning. The core 7. Who was the 7th? It didn't matter. The more horrifying fact was the list he'd made. The list that had James, the random cousin, the list that didn't have me. I'd found Marcus in the den, his eyes glued to the TV, a glass of scotch in his hand. I touched his arm. Marcus, I'd whispered, my throat tight. Can I talk to you for a second? He'd looked annoyed. Babe, it's 3rd and goal, what's up? Liam, I'd said, pulling him into the hallway. He just said there are 7 people going to Japan. He said James is going. Oh yeah, he'd said, his focus still on the roar of the crowd from the TV. Dad invited him last week, it's fine. But Marcus, he counted. He counted Mom, Dad, him, Sarah, you, and James. He didn't include me in his list, and he said 7. That's when he'd finally looked at me and his eyes were cold with impatience. Eliza, my God, you're overthinking this. Liam is an idiot, okay? He can't count. He probably counted Mom twice. Are you seriously going to let my drunk brother ruin your night? He'd put his hand on my shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but just felt heavy, dismissive. It's all handled, he'd said, his voice softening into that placating tone. Trust me, now come on, the game's back on. He'd steered me back to the living room, and I'd let him. I'd sat on that stiff, beige sofa, and I told myself I was crazy, paranoid, that I was overreacting. Liam was drunk. Marcus was right. Now, standing on Jenna's porch, the snow melting into my hair, I finally understood. Liam wasn't drunk. He wasn't an idiot. He was the only one who had accidentally told me the truth. He had said 7. Mom, Dad, Liam, Sarah, Marcus, James, and someone else. My hand balled into a fist and I hammered on Jenna's door. The cold, wet, devastating reality was crashing down on me. I wasn't miscounted. I wasn't forgotten. I was replaced. Jenna yanked the door open so fast it slammed against the wall. She didn't say a word. She just grabbed my arm, her hand surprisingly strong, and hauled me inside. I stumbled into the warmth of her apartment, a tiny, chaotic space that always smelled like coffee and sandalwood, and a wave of dizziness hit me. I was leaving wet, snowy footprints on her hardwood floor. Okay, she said, kicking the door shut and locking the deadbolt. Then you talk, and you're not allowed to cry until you've had at least 8 ounces of hot liquid, doctor's orders. She was back in 90 seconds, pushing a steaming mug into my hands. My fingers were so numb I could barely feel the heat. I was still shaking, but the shivering was internal now, a vibration in my bones. I started, and my voice was a stranger's. Spit it out, Lisa. What did that private equity wannabe scumbag do? And it all came out. In a torrent. The car, the snow, the blood relatives' comment, the $12,000 I'd paid. The insulting offer of a spa week, and then the memory from Sunday. Liam said there were 7 people going, Jenna, 7, and he listed them and I wasn't on the list. Jenna, who was leaning against her kitchen counter, went very still. Okay, wait, count again, slowly. His parents, I whispered, ticking them off on my fingers. Liam and his wife, Sarah, Marcus, and his cousin from Singapore, James. That's 6, Jenna said, her voice flat. I know, that's what I thought. But Liam definitely said 7. He said the core 7. I heard him. Jenna stared at me. Eliza, honey, he didn't mean James instead of you. He meant James, and he meant Marcus. And he meant his parents and his brother. And he meant someone else, someone who is not you. That's number 7. The mug slipped in my hands and hot tea splashed over my fingers. I barely felt it. Who? That, Jenna said, is the $12,000 question, isn't it? A new kind of cold, a sharp, metallic sickness was rising in my throat. I need to check his email. Good, that's a good, practical step. Jenna was already retrieving her laptop from a pile of mail. He gave me his password years ago, I said, my voice hollow as I sat on her sofa. For taxes, married people don't have secrets, he said. The irony of those words was so bitter I could taste it. My fingers were clumsy on the keyboard, Marcus Evans too, and his password, Denver Broncos 2016. The same as it had been for 5 years. Because why would he need to change it? I was just his reasonable, understanding, little bread hobby wife. The inbox loaded. Thousands of unread emails, firm newsletters, market reports. I typed NICECO into the search bar and hit enter. My breath stopped. It wasn't a thread with the travel agency. It wasn't a thread with his father. It was a thread with his mother. Eleanor, dated August 15th. 4 months ago, I clicked it. My heart was a stone. The first email was from Eleanor. Marcus, have you spoken to Eliza about the NICECO situation? You can't just let this fester. It's cruel. My chest tightened. Cruel, his own mother. She knew. Marcus's reply, sent an hour later, Mom, I'll handle it. I'm trying to find the right time. She's been so clingy. Lately, I think some space would be good for us. Clingy, I read the word 10 times. Clingy. Was I clingy when I woke up at 3 a.m. to go bake so he could sleep? Was I clingy when I paid his student loans so his salary could go to his investment wardrobe? Was I clingy when I spent last Christmas with his family, alone, because he had to fly to London for a last-minute deal? I'd spent 9 years making myself smaller, quieter, and more accommodating, all to make space for his giant, fragile ego. I'd funded his life and he'd called me clingy to his mother. And his mother had let him. Her next email a day later was just, fine, but it's your mess to clean up. Don't let it ruin your father's birthday. Oh my God, I whispered. Jenna, his mom knew. They all knew. Jenna was reading over my shoulder, her hand on my back. That's not even the worst part, Lisa. Look at his next reply. It was a new message in the thread to his brother Liam, from Marcus Evans to Liam Evans. Subject. Ray, NICECO dude, back me up on the family only thing if Eliza asks. I'm telling her it's a dad decision. It's just easier than explaining the real situation. I scrolled down, my hand shaking so hard I could barely control the mouse. The real situation? What was the real situation? And then I saw it. A different search result for NICECO. Not an email. It was a calendar invite. Event, NICECO Day 1 attendees, Marcus Evans 2 at hand, Sophie Andrews 91 at Sophie Andrews, I said aloud. Who is Sophie Andrews? Pull up his text messages, Jenna said, her voice like ice. You're on his cloud account, right? Let's find out. My hands were hovering over the trackpad, but I couldn't make them move. I don't know if I can, Jen. Yes, you can, Jenna said, her voice a low, hard command. She knelt in front of me, taking the laptop from my lap and setting it firmly on the coffee table. Then she put her hands on my knees. You have to, right now you are a person who is guessing. You need to be a person who knows. You deserve to know. She was right. The not knowing, the swirling, sick feeling of paranoia and self-doubt, that was a prison. Knowing was an escape. Even if it was an escape into a burning building. I leaned forward and clicked the green and white icon. The iMessage app opened, syncing with his phone, which was, I assumed, charging on the bedside table of our empty apartment. A long list of blue and gray bubbles populated the screen. Colleagues, his mother, his brother Liam, and then one near the top, pinned just two initials, SA. My finger trembled as I clicked it. The most recent messages were from an hour ago. SA just landed at Den. You still in that meeting? Marcus, still here. She's having some kind of meltdown about the trip. God, SA, seriously, she's still on that. I thought you handled it. Marcus, I am in the car. She'll be fine. She'll go to a spa. She always calms down. My stomach twisted. This was Hap E Ning. He was texting this person while I was in the car next to him. While he was patting my hand and calling me dramatic. Keep scrolling, Lisa, Jenna said, her voice a low growl. Go back, find the Niceco messages. I scrolled back. Past weeks of can't wait to see you and headed home, until I hit October. The week I'd paid the $12,000 deposit. So it's really booked. She actually paid for the family deposit, Marcus, like clockwork. Honestly, it's brilliant. Gives us the perfect cover. The whole family will be there. No one will suspect a thing. 5 days in Niceco in our own room while your wife thinks you're on a family trip. Alex, you're a terrible person. Marcus, you love it. I love that we're finally getting a real vacation. I hate hiding in hotel bars. I stopped breathing. Jenna, I whispered, she's going. I know, honey, Jenna said, her hand rubbing my back in small, hard circles. Keep reading. Marcus, what she doesn't know won't hurt her. And besides, she'll probably be relieved to have a week away from my family. It's a win-win. A win-win. I'd paid $12,000 for my own betrayal, and he was calling it a win-win. But the sickness I felt was nothing compared to what I saw next. The conversation wasn't just about the trip. It was about me. It was about the future. So are you ever going to tell her about us? Or am I just the girl you ski with? Marcus, babe, we've talked about this. Once I make partner, we can figure out the divorce situation. You keep saying that. Once I make partner. Marcus, I'm serious. I can't afford a messy divorce right now. It's too distracting. And honestly, right now, Eliza's useful. My blood didn't just go cold, it evaporated. There was nothing left in my veins but dry, empty space. Useful. Marcus. Her little bread hobby? It's stupid, but it's consistent. It keeps the finances stable. It pays the mortgage while all my cash is tied up in bonuses. I can't rock the boat until that bonus check clears. You get that right, useful. My little bread hobby, the thing I woke up for at 3 a.m., the thing that put blisters on my hands. The thing that had paid for his suits, his scotch, his student loans, and this very trip. It wasn't a marriage. It was a long-term business arrangement. I wasn't his wife. I was his investor. I was the angel investor in the startup of his life, and he was planning to cash me out for a newer, younger model as soon as his real payout arrived. All the love, all the support, all the sacrifices, they weren't just unappreciated. They had been cataloged. They had been entered into a spreadsheet in his head under the heading useful. I read the text again. Eliza's useful. I stopped crying. The shaking stopped. The hot, messy grief that had choked me in the car and on the sidewalk, it was gone. In its place, something cold and clear and hard. It was a feeling I recognized. It was the feeling I got at 4 a.m. when a 50-pound batch of dough had failed, the ovens were cold, and I had 2 hours to fix it before the morning rush. It was resolve. But this was a new kind of resolve. It was cold. It was calculating, and it was pure. I looked up from the laptop. Jenna was watching me, her expression terrified. Eliza, she whispered. Are you okay? You look scary. I'm documenting, I said, and my voice was flat, hard. Unfamiliar, I reached for the laptop and started taking screenshots. Every text, every email, every calendar invite. I need you to print these for me, and I need a new folder on your desktop. What are you? What are you doing? I looked at her and I think I smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. He thinks I'm useful, I said. He's about to find out exactly how useful I can be. He wants to go to Japan, fine, he's going. I paid for it after all. I stood up, my spine rigid. The fury was a fuel, clean and high octane. It was the clearest I'd felt in 9 years. And then, I said, my voice dropping, I'm going to take everything. I didn't sleep for the next 48 hours. I operated out of Jenna's apartment like a war room. Jenna, God bless her, became my quartermaster. She brought me coffee, printed stacks of documents from the USB drive I'd sent her to, and kept her mouth shut just watching me work. My grief, that hot, messy, paralyzing thing, had burned itself out. What was left was a pure, cold, burning fuel. It was the same energy that had got me through the first year of the bakery, when I was working 100-hour weeks on 2 hours of sleep, my hands raw and bleeding from kneading dough. It was the energy of survival. I was no longer a wife. I was a baker executing a complex, multi-day recipe, and I would not miss a single step. Step 1, organize the evidence. I created a new, secure cloud folder. I made subfolders: financials, affair, NICECO, family comms. I took the screenshots from Jenna's laptop and sorted every single one. I cross-referenced the SA text messages with the credit card statements, the ones for the business card Marcus used, the one I paid. The $300 dinner at Matsuhisa he'd claimed was client schmoozing. The text showed him and Sophie arguing about omakase, the $450 charge for a room at the Broadmoor in Colorado Springs. He'd told me it was a firm retreat. The texts 2 days later: that was the best weekend I've ever had. I wish we didn't have to go back. Every lie, every charge, every faked meeting. I created a master spreadsheet. Column A, the lie. Column B, the reality. Column C, the cost. When I was done, I had an itemized, dated, and cross-referenced invoice for the complete betrayal. The total he had stolen from me from my business under the guise of client expenses in the last 6 months alone was $14,800. Step 2, find the architect. I didn't need a marriage counselor. I didn't need a friend to cry to. I needed a weapon. Jenna, I said, looking up from the laptop. My eyes felt like they were full of sand. Who is the most ruthless, terrifying, and effective divorce lawyer in Denver? Jenna, who had been a paralegal in a former life, didn't even blink. You don't want a shark, you want a goddamn orca. You want Miss Croft? Miss Croft's office wasn't in one of the glass and steel monstrosities downtown. It was in a historic red brick building in Lodoo. The lobby was old world, dark wood, leather, the smell of money so old it was practically decomposing. But when I stepped off the elevator into her penthouse suite, it was like stepping into the future. It was all white marble, glass walls, and razor-sharp angles with a stunning panoramic view of the mountains. It was a room that said, I can see everything and there is nowhere to hide. Miss Croft was, to my surprise, younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s. She wore a severe black suit, her hair was pulled into an impossibly tight bun, and her eyes, behind square designer frames, were the most intelligent and coldest I had ever seen. She looked at me like I was a math problem she was about to solve. You have 1 hour, Miss Evans, she said, gesturing to a hard, minimalist chair. Jenna called in a favor. Tell me why I should take your case. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I opened my laptop. I don't need an hour, I said. I'll need 20 minutes and you'll take the case. I turned the laptop around. I showed her the spreadsheet, the folders, the texts, the emails from his mother. I laid out the $12,000 NICECO deposit paid from my business account. I showed her the student loan payments documented coming directly from my bakery's savings. She scrolled, she read. Her face didn't change, but I saw her right eyebrow tick up just once when she read the text message. Eliza's useful. When I was finished, she closed the laptop slowly. She stood up, walked to the glass wall, and looked out at the mountains for a long, silent minute. Well, she said, her back still to me, this is thorough. He leaves for Japan in 5 weeks, I said, my voice as steady as hers. She turned around. And you want to file an emergency injunction, freeze his assets before he gets on the plane. No, I said. Miss Croft's eyebrow went up again. No, I repeated. I want him to go. I want him to get on that plane with his mistress. I want him to have his 5 days in NICECO in the chalet I paid for, thinking he is the smartest man in the world. I want him to believe he has gotten away with everything. I leaned forward. And then, Miss Croft, I want him to come home. And I want him to find out that while he was skiing, you and I have legally and systematically dismantled his entire life. I want him to come home to consequences. Miss Croft was very, very still. I could see her calculating, the strategy, the audacity. Then, for the first time, she smiled. It was a thin, cold, terrifying smile. Mrs. Evans, she said, extending a hand. I believe this is going to be a very, very productive partnership. Let's talk about my retainer. and let's map out the first 30 days of your new life. I left Miss Croft's office and stepped out into the bright, cold Lodu afternoon. The world felt different, sharper. The 19th century brickwork looked like it had been etched in high definition. The sound of the light rail, the smell of roasted nuts from a street cart, the brush of a stranger's coat, every sense was amplified. I wasn't a victim anymore, I was a predator. I stayed at Jenna's for one more day just to get my story straight, to let the last of the red-eyed, puffy-faced grief subside. I practiced my apology in her mirror until it sounded genuine, not pathetic, just tired. On the third day, I went home. Walking into our apartment was the strangest feeling. It wasn't my home anymore, it was a stage. Every object was a prop. The plush sofa we'd picked out, the framed photos of us smiling in Vale in Santa Fe, in all of it, lies, and the redwood table, that massive, polished slab of a tree he'd insisted on. It was the centerpiece of the room, and I saw it for what it was, an altar where I had sacrificed my own success for his. I didn't have to wait long. I heard his keys in the lock at 7 p.m. He came in slowly, saw my boots by the door, and his shoulders tensed. He was braced for a fight, a storm of tears, another dramatic scene. He found me in the kitchen, calmly stirring a pot of risotto. "Eliza," he said, his voice wary. He hadn't seen me in 3 days. I looked up from the stove. I let my face be soft, weary. I even managed to conjure a small, shaky smile. "Hey, you're home." "You're here," he said, setting his briefcase down on the table. "You weren't answering my texts. I was worried." "Worried I'd cut off your credit card, I thought." "I know," I said, and I turned off the heat. I walked over to him but didn't touch him. "Marcus, I need to apologize." The look on his face, a flicker of pure, unadulterated shock, was almost enough to make me laugh. "I overreacted the other night," I said, twisting my hands. "I've just been so exhausted with the bakery, the holiday orders. I've been running on fumes. When you told me about the trip, I snapped. I made it about me, and it was unfair." His posture was changing. The defensive stiffness was melting. He was starting to see the opening. "Babe, no," he said, his voice softening into that placating tone I now knew was reserved for problems he had to manage. "You had a right to be upset. I handled it badly." "A little," I said with a small, self-deprecating laugh. "But you were right, your dad's 60th, it should be what he wants. And honestly, this was the masterpiece. That spa week you mentioned, I think I'd actually love that. I think I need it, just a week to myself, to sleep, to not bake." The relief that flooded his face was so total, so absolute, it was pathetic. He'd just won. The difficult wife had been pacified. The problem had been solved. He smiled, a genuine, smug smile. "See," he said, finally stepping forward to pull me into a hug. His arms felt like stone. "I knew you'd get it. I knew you'd understand." "I'm sorry," I whispered into his expensive wool suit, my eyes wide open, staring at the wall behind him. "I'm just so tired." "It's okay, babe," he said, stroking my hair. "It's all okay." That night, I played the part of the supportive, understanding, useful wife. I served him his favorite meal. I asked about his day at the firm, nodding and making the appropriate sympathetic noises as he complained about analysts and a difficult client. I watched him check his phone, which he kept face down on the table. Every buzz, he'd glance at it, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. Essay. I watched him like a scientist studying a particularly predictable insect. I cataloged the way his eyes slid away when I asked a direct question. The way he explained a late night at the office with just a little too much detail. Later, in bed, he fell asleep almost instantly, his breathing heavy and satisfied. He was a man with no problems. His wife was handled. His mistress was waiting. His vacation was paid for. I lay next to him in the dark, my body rigid, my eyes burning. I did not sleep. I listened to him breathe, and I planned. For the next 5 weeks, I was a ghost. I was the perfect, supportive partner. I helped him pack. I asked about his ski gear. I confirmed his family's dinner reservations at the chalet, and I documented. Every night after he fell asleep, I was on my laptop at that redwood table. I found the new credit card, the one he'd opened in his own name. He wasn't a complete idiot, he just thought I was, but he'd used our home address. The paperless statements were easy to find. There, in a sea of his usual expensive lunches, I found it. A charge from last week. TUMI luggage $895. I remembered the text message I'd seen at Jenna's. Essay, I have nothing to wear for snow or to pack in. My hand, steady and sure, moved the mouse. I took a screenshot. I saved it to the affair folder. I added a new line to my spreadsheet. Column A, the lie. Column B, the reality. Column C, the cost. I looked at the number. He was getting cocky. He was getting sloppy. I went back to bed, sliding in next to him. He didn't stir. I closed my eyes and smiled in the dark. Let him, I thought, let him buy her the world. He's about to find out what it really costs. The weeks bled into March. Outside, the stubborn Denver snows of early spring began to melt, but inside our apartment, the climate was Arctic. I was a master of my role. I was polite, supportive, and emotionally distant, a performance I disguised as stress from the bakery. Marcus, deep in his own web of lies, didn't notice. He was just relieved I was no longer being dramatic. He was getting ready for his partnership review. It was all he talked about, the endless meetings, the schmoozing, the pitch decks. He was distracted, arrogant, and blissfully unaware. He was, in short, the perfect target. It was a Tuesday, 3 weeks before the NICECO trip. 10 o'clock a.m. I was in my bakery's office, a tiny, windowless room that smelled of yeast and old invoices. It was my sanctuary, the one place in the world that was truly mine. The sounds of the mixers and the roar of the ovens outside were a dull, comforting hum. On my desk, I had my 3-ring binder, the one Miss Croft had made me compile. It was tabbed, color-coded, and heavier than a brick. I also had a small, printed script. My heart was not in my chest. It was in my throat, beating a frantic, terrified rhythm. My hands were shaking so hard I had to sit on them. You can do this, I told myself. You've handled 80-quart mixers. You can handle one phone call. I dialed the main line for his firm, Wells Fargo Advisors, not his extension, not his department. The main switchboard. Wells Fargo Advisors, how may I direct your call? I need to speak with David Harrison, please, I said. My voice was calm. I'd practiced it. It was the voice I used for difficult corporate clients. Is Mr. Harrison expecting your call? No, I said. But you can tell him it's regarding a highly sensitive matter that may impact the firm's ethics policies and client accounts. My name is Eliza Evans. The click of the hold button was deafening. I waited for 1 minute, then 2. I was about to hang up, my nerve failing when the line clicked again. This is David Harrison, a deep, impatient voice said. You have 2 minutes. I took a breath. I looked at my script. Mr. Harrison, my name is Eliza Evans. I am Marcus Evans's wife. Mrs. Evans, he said, and the temperature in his voice dropped 20 degrees. I hope you understand, I do not get involved in the personal. This isn't personal, Mr. Harrison, I interrupted, and my voice had a new edge. It was the edge from Miss Croft's office. This is financial. I have reason to believe my husband has been misappropriating client funds and violating your firm's ethics policies. Silence. A long, heavy, expensive silence. Those are exceptionally serious allegations, he said, his voice no longer impatient but lethally focused. I have documentation, I said, my eyes scanning my spreadsheet. Hotel rooms billed to client accounts on dates when he was not traveling for business. Dozens of dinners at high-end restaurants charged as client development that were, in fact, personal meals. A pattern of behavior that shows a clear misuse of firm resources. I let that hang in the air. This behavior, I continued, seems to be motivated by a long-term, clandestine relationship he is conducting with one of his junior associates. A woman named Sophie Andrews. I heard him inhale sharply. I'd hit the nerve. It wasn't the adultery he cared about, it was the liability, the financial risk mixed with an internal HR nightmare. Mrs. Evans, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. I must tell you, this puts us in an extremely delicate position regarding your husband's upcoming partnership review. I understand that, I said, and I injected the perfect amount of wifely, naive concern into my voice. I'm not trying to sabotage his career, Mr. Harrison. I truly am not. I simply believe that the firm has a right to know when its resources are being compromised and when its clients are being, perhaps, fraudulently billed. Another long pause. I could practically hear the calculations happening on his end. The potential lawsuits, the client audits. We will be opening an internal investigation. Immediately, he said, thank you for bringing this to our attention. He hung up. I set the receiver down in its cradle. My hand was perfectly steady. The adrenaline was so potent it made me feel lightheaded. I had just, in one 2-minute phone call, taken a match to the entire foundation of my husband's life. That night, Marcus came home late. He looked haggard. He'd loosened his tie, a rare sign of disarray. God, he'd grumbled, throwing his briefcase onto the redwood table. Weirdest damn day, Harrison was in a mood. Called me in for a random check-in. The whole vibe at the office is off. I looked up from the oven where his favorite meal, a braised short rib I'd started 6 hours ago, was simmering. Oh no, I said, my face a perfect mask of gentle concern. That sounds awful. Do you want a drink? You look like you need one. He'd grunted in affirmation, and I'd poured him a very expensive, very large glass of scotch. I served him dinner. I listened to him complain. I nodded in all the right places. And inside, I was counting 10 days until his flight to NYSCO, 10 days until he thought he'd won, 10 days until the rest of his life. 9 days. 5, 2, and then 0. It was the night before his flight. I moved through the apartment in a state of surreal calm. The play I had been performing for 5 weeks was finally reaching its last act. Every line had been rehearsed. Every prop was in place. I made a reservation, I announced, coming into the living room where he was packing. He was zipping up a brand new, very expensive Tumi carry-on, the one I'd seen on the credit card statement, the one for Sophie. He looked up, distracted. A reservation for what? I've got to be at DIA at 4 a.m. for Tara, I said, at 8. He stopped zipping. He stared at me. Tara was the most absurd, most expensive, most pretentious restaurant in Denver. It was a 20-course, 3-hour gastronomic journey that cost a mortgage payment. We'd never been. It was his dream restaurant. Babe, he fumbled. That's insane. It's like $800 a person. How did you even get a table? I told them it was a special occasion, I said, smoothing the front of my black dress, the one he'd always liked. It is, isn't it, your dad's 60th? And I smiled, your partnership review. I wanted to do something to celebrate before you go. His face lit up with a look I hadn't seen in years, a look of pure, almost childlike delight. It was the look of a man who was getting everything he ever wanted. He thought it was because of the dinner. I knew it was because in his mind his wife was handled, his mistress was packed, and his future was secure. The restaurant was ridiculous. It was all foam and essences and deconstructed somethings served on slabs of rock and pillows that puffed flavored smoke. It was a temple of ego, and Marcus basked in it. He kept his phone on the table next to his wine glass, face up. It buzzed every few minutes. "SA, God, sorry," he'd say, picking it up. "Liam is a mess, totally disorganized. Just confirming his arrival time." "Of course," I said, sipping my $40 glass of wine. "It's a lot to coordinate." I watched him text, his thumbs flying, a little smile on his face. He was so confident, so smug. He was texting his mistress, Sophie Andrews, in front of his wife under the guise of family, and he was so sure he was the smartest man in the room. Halfway through the ocean course, he put his phone down, covered my hand with his, and gave me that look. The one that was supposed to be sincere. "Eliza," he said, his voice low, Are you really okay with all this, with not coming? I know I was a jerk about it," and I met his gaze. I held it. I didn't blink. I let him see whatever he wanted to see, the supportive, tired, useful wife. "Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly soft, "I'm exactly where I need to be. I've got the bakery. You've got this big, incredible week. It's all working out. I'm not worried about a thing." Relief flooded his face. This was his final checkpoint. He had passed. He was clear for takeoff. He raised his glass. "To you, Lisa, for being so goddamn understanding." And he smiled, that full, arrogant, partnership-ready smile. To the next chapter. I raised my glass of overpriced wine. The crystal clinked. "To the next chapter," I agreed. "And to finally getting everything you deserve." "To everything I deserve," he echoed, and he drank deep, completely missing the razor's edge in my words. When the check came, it was presented in a small, leather-bound tomb. $914. Marcus reached for it, that performative gesture of a man who knows he's not paying. "Babe, let me—" "Absolutely not," I said, pulling out my personal credit card, not the business one. The one he didn't know existed. "This is my treat." His treat? The words tasted like power, One last perfect dinner before your big trip, you've earned it. He didn't argue. He never argued when I offered to pay. We walked out into the cold March night. The air was sharp and clean. Marcus was a little drunk on wine and ego, and he slung his arm over my shoulders. I let my body stay rigid as he pulled me in. I was an actress, and the curtain was about to fall. I could feel the hard, cold plastic of the credit card in my pocket, one final time paying for the privilege of his company. We got home just after 11. He went straight to the bedroom to finish packing. Gotta get this done so I can at least try to sleep for 2 hours, he called out. I stood in the living room in the dark looking at the redwood table. The moonlight hit the polished surface. I ran my hand over it, this object that had been a symbol of his ego, of my sacrifice. It was about to become the stage for my final scene. His alarm went off at 3:45 am. The sound was a digital shriek that cut through the darkness, and I'd been lying awake for hours waiting for it. I got up with him. I played the supportive wife one final, perfect time. I made him coffee in the expensive machine he'd insisted we buy, the one that supposedly made coffee the way it's meant to be. I watched him, bleary-eyed and self-satisfied, zip his bags and check his jacket pocket for his passport. I walked him to the door of our apartment. The first light of 4 a.m. was just starting to paint the windows a bruised, dark blue. "Have an amazing time," I said, and I even stood on my toes to kiss his cheek. His skin was cold. "Tell your dad I said happy birthday." "I will, babe," he said, distracted, his eyes already on his phone, checking his Uber. "You relax this week, okay? Get that spa week." "Oh, I will," I said, my voice soft. "I'm already booked." He smiled, that same smug, relieved smile. He gave a little wave, stepped into the hallway, and turned toward the elevator. The doors dinged, they slid shut, and he was gone. I stood at the door for 1 full minute. I did not cry, I did not pace. I closed the deadbolt, the thunk of it loud in the silent apartment, walked into the kitchen, and made myself a real pot of coffee. At 6 o'clock on the dot, I was at my desk, my hobby desk. I texted Miss Croft, "He's airborne." Her reply was immediate, "Understood. The papers will be filed at 9:01 a.m. when the courthouse opens." "You're sure about this, Eliza?" I typed back one word, "Yes." At 8:55 a.m. my doorbell rang, not the buzzer from downstairs, the door to the apartment. I opened it. 4 men in matching blue uniforms stood there, quiet and professional. "Mrs. Evans, we're the movers." "This way," I said, "just the items I've marked." By 11 a.m., the apartment was gutted. It was brutal. It was fast. My clothes, my books, my grandmother's antique desk, every pot and pan from the kitchen, my stand mixers, my baking awards, my computer, my printer. My entire design studio's worth of equipment. The few pieces of art I had bought, my whole life packed into 48 boxes. What was left? His suits, his Peloton, his whiskey collection, and the redwood table. At 11:30, I did my final walkthrough. The apartment was hollow, echoing, and sterile. It was just a box, and I was finally free of it. I went to the bedroom, to the small velvet box on my dresser. I picked up my wedding ring and my engagement ring, the ones I'd been wearing for the performance. I walked into the dining room. I placed my wedding ring directly in the center of that massive, polished slab of redwood, right in the middle where the light from the window would hit it. Next to it, I placed a single thick white manila envelope. Inside was not a letter from me. There was nothing left to say. Inside was a copy of the divorce papers already filed with the county court. The full 8-page itemized spreadsheet of every dollar he had stolen, every lie I had documented, cross-referenced with his affair. The best of the text messages between him and Sophie. The useful one, the one about the Toomey luggage. The one about his distracting wife. And on top, a single, beautiful 8x10 glossy print. It was a screenshot of the $12,000 NICECO Chalet deposit, marked paid in full from my business account. I placed my apartment key on top of the envelope. I ran my hand over the live edge of the wood one last time. "It's an anchor piece," I whispered to the empty room. "It shows you're serious." Then I walked out, closed the door, and didn't look back. My new apartment was a small, pre-war studio in Wash Park, with hardwood floors that creaked, a radiator that hissed, and a big, south-facing window that flooded the room with sunlight. It was a third of the size of the old apartment and felt instantly and completely like home. Jenna and my two bakers, sworn to secrecy and well paid, had my entire life moved in by noon. The first 2 days were quiet. I arranged my books. I put my grandmother's desk by the window. I bought a real mattress, the first one I'd ever picked out just for myself. I sat in the sunlight, drank tea, and did something I hadn't done in 9 years. I rested. On day 3, my phone buzzed, an unknown number with an international prefix. Japan. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, another call, same number, voicemail, a third, a fourth. Then a text from a number I didn't recognize. His mother's. Eliza, you need to call Marcus. It's an emergency. He is hysterical. I blocked her number. Finally, the voicemail icon lit up. I pressed play, my hand steady on my teacup. His voice, tinny and ripped apart by static and panic, filled my quiet apartment. Eliza, what did you do? What the hell did you do? My firm called there. They're opening an investigation. Harrison called me in Japan, yelling about an ethics violation. Sophie's losing her mind. My key card for the room isn't working. What did you do? And you took all the money. That's theft. The message cut off. I stood in my sunny studio and played it again, this time closing my eyes, savoring the details. The high-pitched, panicked voice of a woman in the background, Sophie. The way his voice cracked on investigation. The pure, unadulterated terror of a man whose script had been shredded, whose stage had been set on fire. I played it one more time, then I deleted it. I texted Miss Croft. He knows. Her reply, good, let him panic. He'll be served at the airport when he lands. We also filed the motion to have your business assets officially shielded from the divorce proceedings, given the evidence of his misappropriation. It was granted. He hadn't just lost his marriage. He had lost his useful wife. The next few weeks were a blur of delicious, productive silence. I heard snippets from Jenna, who heard them from the legal grapevine. Marcus had been placed on administrative leave. Sophie Andrews had been quietly reassigned to the Omaha office, a fate in banking worse than being fired. The NICECO trip, which he'd apparently tried to continue, had been a disaster. His father, upon learning why I wasn't there, had apparently screamed at him in the chalet lobby. His family was fractured. The divorce was record fast. He had no leverage. He was unemployed, disgraced, and facing a mountain of evidence that was, as Miss Croft put it, legally airtight. He tried to fight for the apartment he lost. He tried to fight for spousal support, the audacity, and Miss Croft had simply emailed his lawyer the useful text, and the request was withdrawn. He got the redwood table. I got my freedom. That was 6 months ago. My bakery is thriving. I just signed the lease on a second location. I hired a manager so I no longer wake up at 3 a.m. unless I want to. I sleep. I've even started dating a kind, funny architect who thinks my artisan bread hobby is the most fascinating, brilliant thing he's ever seen. Last week, I was walking near Union Station, on my way to meet him for dinner. It was a cold, clear night, the city lit up for the holidays. I was early, so I was walking slowly, just enjoying the air, and I saw him. He was across the street, huddled outside a dive bar, smoking. He looked diminished. The expensive wool coat was gone, replaced by a thin, worn-out parka. The confident, arrogant posture I remembered was gone, replaced by a hunched-over uncertainty. He looked thin and gray and tired. He looked up right as I was passing. Our eyes met across the street. I saw the flash of recognition, the shock, the shame. He even took a half step as if to call out to me. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I didn't smile. I just looked through him like he was a stranger I'd accidentally made eye contact with. I held his gaze for 1 second too, and then I just kept walking. I turned the corner, my heels clicking on the pavement, and I didn't look back. There was nothing to say, no triumph, no anger, not even pity. He wasn't my problem anymore. He wasn't my business. He wasn't even a memory. He was just a man I used to know who had made a series of very, very bad investments. I'd paid $12,000 for a trip I was never meant to take, but that $12,000 had bought me this. This walk, this cold air, this life that was completely, finally, and beautifully my own. Best money I ever spent.